Hey guys, welcome to Southern Law After Hours. Sometimes I pour myself a drink. It's a little early in the day, but I do have a nice bottle of Swiss Etter Kirsch here that I likely will open depending on how the comments go for this video. So we'll see. I'm going to come off the fence, this straddling fence that process guys like me often like to sit on, and go undercover and do a little reconnaissance on the far sides of this case. People who will tell you that absolutely Manson did not abuse these women, particularly Wood. He's incapable of it. He's a sweet guy, gives to charity. No way. This is bad motives, all lies. And then change outfits, cycle around to the other side. Manson's obviously an abuser. These women are not lying. You need to believe these women. They're telling the truth. Absolutely certain that they were abused by Manson. So let's look at the basis for some of those arguments and maybe encourage people that are that far stratified in these camps to look at their own arguments and be prepared to analyze the case maybe a little more holistically than they have so far. So if you're telling me that absolutely Manson did not do this, he didn't abuse anybody, you're absolutely sure that this is a lie, and part of your basis for that is he's not the kind of person who would do it. He's being maligned for how he appears, judged for his art, then you're going to have to reconcile with the fact, and we'll get into this, that you're calling him a liar in ways that are material to this case. Likewise, if you're telling me that Wood has told the truth, she stood up, she was brave to do it, she finally gave a voice to the women who had been abused by this guy, and there is no way that there's anything other than that's exactly what happened, you're going to have to contend with the fact that you are calling her flat out a liar in ways that are material to this case. You've got the luxury to do that if you're on social media. You don't have the luxury to do that if you're the lawyers for these people or anybody advising them, because you must be able to look at the other side's case, and you also have to be able to look at the weaknesses of your case. And one of the things you don't want to do is put a proposition on the table that is so ridiculous that the other side can attack it and undermine everything else you say, because this all comes back to credibility. Who's going to have it? And in a civil case, like what these guys are going through, the jury's tasked with looking at the greater weight of the evidence. Whose story is more likely than not true? This isn't beyond a reasonable doubt kind of situation here. These are two civil litigants going after each other. So you want to tilt that table just slightly one way or the other. So you look for the other side's weaknesses, okay? You look for your own strengths. You look at your own weaknesses and how to counter those, how to get those out there and explain them. You can't ignore them. So we'll look at Manson first, and then we'll look at Wood and see the people who are just certain that he's correct, what might they be ignoring. I've looked at a lot of the things that the anti-Manson people have sent me or that I found on my own. I've looked at a lot of the things that pro-Manson people have sent me or that I found on my own, and I will definitely agree with this proposition. Manson should not be judged based on how he looks or based on the music that he makes or based on a character that he may sometimes play. Abusers are not captured within one type of look or behavior pattern. Somebody who's the holiest person in the church could secretly be an abuser. A trusted family member could be an abuser. An abuser could be somebody who just exactly looks like an abuser, standing in a trench coat on the side of the road next to a van that says free candy on it. Okay? So they can come in any shape, size, stripe, or whatever. On the other hand, the fact that Manson has these attributes of misogyny associated with his character, that's not a free pass to think that it's impossible for him to be an abuser or to take everything that he's ever done that could be considered a trait of an abuser and shove it into this, well, that's just art category. It could be, okay, but not automatically. That's just an excuse to forgive all the lies that he may tell. They have to be looked at and see whether this is a character trait that tends toward abuse or whether it is art. If you're assessing the notion that he is not capable of doing that, okay? I'm not saying it's evidence all that should be presented in court to show he's an abuser. No, not just general everything that he's ever done. I'm talking about the people who say there's no way that he possibly abused anybody because he's sweet, he gives to charity and things like that. If you're going to talk about general character stuff, then you need to look at the whole character of the person. So when somebody says, well, Manson's sweet, what are you supposed to make out of that? He's sweet to everybody all the time? How in the world would you know that? That doesn't make any sense to suggest that he couldn't be abusive. That's essentially irrelevant. Even if he were going around being mean all the time, it doesn't mean that he's abusive behind closed doors to some criminal level. So to me, that's essentially a frivolous kind of argument. Ted Bundy wasn't rude to everybody that he met. However, when he was mean, he was extremely mean. So I'm throwing that out. He gave to charity, okay? That's nice if he did it. That's great. It doesn't have anything to do with whether he's ever abused anybody or not. So take a look at Manson and see maybe why his situation is going to line up a little differently than Depp's, say. Manson created his whole persona based on an original concept of beat up your mom music, he called it. And in his book, he has this tale where he assaults his mother physically pretty drastically. And throughout the decades that he's performed, he's talked about locking girls up in closets. He's talked about wishing he could kill them. He's talked about being turned on, that they're terrified. He's made so many misogynistic comments, it's impossible to catalog them all. Now, I have no doubt and completely agree that many of these were made in a flippant manner and that he was joking. I get that. Not sure exactly the audience that you pull in, although I guess there is one, by making jokes about beating up your mother or wanting to kill women or rape is funny, that sort of thing. I guess there's an audience for that. I know that's not the totality of all of his music, and thank God for that. I can't have any defenders if that's all he talked about. But it is some of what he talked about. Now, of course, they're going to throw down and say, well, that's just his art, bro. That's just his art. You can't use any of that against him. And that could be true. That could be true. Again, maybe he's building up to this audience that needs to hear more about, accommodating rape and beating women and things. That's artistic in a sense. But an artist's art is not inherently necessarily separate from the personality. And I did find one witness who could comment directly, maybe more than any of us, on whether Manson sees his own personal self as completely distinct from his art. Let's see what this witness says.
How natural does it feel the way you are perceived? And is it sort of a mask that you actually remove at certain times, or is it always there for you?
I don't ever remove my personality. I don't wake up and go to bed, dressed as I do when I'm in public, but neither does anyone else. But I don't consider myself to be playing a role or to be wearing a costume or a mask or anything like that. I just enjoy expressing myself through the way I look, and my personality is always the same.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's and there's not one easy level to my personality. Most people would probably think that I'm schizophrenic because I behave quite differently in each situation.
Well, whoever that guy is, he seems to have his finger on this notion of whether Marilyn Manson is separate completely as a person versus the character that he plays, and not really, not so much, huh? That makes sense to me. I get that. And I think you'll see when you see Manson interviewed and things, especially when he's sober, he's a pretty quick-witted person. I can see why people are attracted to the charisma that he has, because he's sometimes funny, he's creative, he's quick on his feet when he's talking. So yeah, those are good things. But these other things are out here too, and some of them are just really disturbing. And look at these images here. And I know the defense notion will be, it's just art. Okay. This is still coming into somebody's mind to make this for their personal use, or how they want other people to see them. Whatever. It's pretty nasty. You got to agree. This is pretty nasty. So I don't think it's credible to say that the mind that finds these images worth creating is a mind that's completely incapable of abuse. And I'll add two more factors into that. And one is, at different times in Manson's life, of course, and this is true with the women that he was partners with, is engaged in heavy drug use by his own account and by their accounts. Heavy alcohol use. and behind closed doors, extremely exhausted on unknown combinations of drugs. How can anybody say they know what did, or other than the participants, and maybe they don't know, what did or didn't happen behind those closed doors? How can you know that? If he's sweet later when he's sober, how do you know what happened behind that door? You don't know. So the drugs and alcohol are a factor in terms of the behavior, like how far amplified did this notion of treating women like this get at any point over decades. It never in decades, it never went too far, and you just know that, even with all the drugs and stuff. The other thing I think I've seen people approaching Manson backstage and at events and things like that, and sometimes, and this includes women too, that when they're talking to him, you can tell they want him to be this kind of person. They want the nasty person. And in most of these, to Manson's credit, I don't see that he lives up to that. I know about the stories about him touching women and having them strip and things like that on tour buses and stuff. It's nasty rock and roll stuff. I get all that. But that's a two-way street. I'm sorry, it just is. The fans push him into this character. They eat it up. And I think you get a fueling there of this character becomes a larger presence in his life potentially because of that. Because that's what people want. And that side of his personality develops more than maybe it otherwise would have. So when you contend that Manson is incapable of having abused these women, that it's not in the realm of possibility, it doesn't make a difference if 5,000 of them say it. They're all liars for the reasons that everybody thinks that they are. They all lie. When you do that, you're also saying Manson was a liar. That all the things he ever said about abusing women, that every one of them were lies. And I know you pick them all up and you put them into the basket of, it's just his art, bro. Even though he says that's not completely distinct, you'll say, well, that's also art, bro. So if you got a motive like that, a narrative that you can use to forgive the lies of the person that you're supporting, I get that. But you need to understand, not everybody's necessarily going to go, I'll give this person the benefit of the doubt for everything they've ever said that would undermine their case, and I'll strictly construe the other side, everything they've ever said against their case. Probably not going to work like that with the judge, and maybe not with the jury. And certainly the lawyers for both sides are going to have to look at the weaknesses of their own cases. But that's not the end for Manson. The idea that he's not infallible and incapable of abuse, which I think is a strange position to have, but it does seem to be a position some people hold. That doesn't mean he's an abuser. You can still hold the position he probably didn't do it, or the more reasonable position that they can't prove it. And if they're going to accuse him of the abuse, they should prove it. And there are issues with the people making the accusations. We'll get to that on the other side. This is not some clean set of accusations. Whether you find them persuasive or not, they have their own problems. And you could say, I don't know. There are a lot of things that could be said there, but the proposition that he couldn't have done it, and I know this, even though I was not with him at all times, because I know that he's sweet and is giving money to charity, and the women lie and things like that. You're beyond what you can know. You just really are. Anybody, anywhere could be an abuser. How do you know that they are or they aren't? How do you know that? Now, I do agree that the people making the accusations should have the burden of proof to show that that occurred. That's the system we have, and that's the best system that we possibly can have. That will result in some people getting off with crimes. I get that. But the consequence of allowing false accusations to put people in peril is too great, and it's just not through the course of history found to be the system that results in the closest justice that we can possibly get. So I'm sticking with that. So I think Manson is entitled to that deference, that I'm not thinking of him as an abuser until there's proof of that, regardless of what my own suspicions may be, which I'll tell that at the end of this video for whatever it may be worth. So that's the Manson side of the equation. Let's look at Evan Rachel Wood. Some people think she's just lying about all this. Some people don't know. Some people think, she's probably telling the truth, but if you just get far enough off the fence, go way out there into the hinterlands, you'll find people who are absolutely sure that they know that what she has said, all of it, everything bad about Manson is completely true. Probably more she hasn't remembered yet. It's all true. Now, here's the problem with that. If you're certain that all that she's saying now about Manson is true, then you are calling her a liar over a period of years about things relevant to this case. It's well documented in the media, in interviews, press, that before Wood decided to come forward with allegations of abuse, her stories about her relationship with Manson were far different than what she says happened now. That she called him humorous and nice and enjoyed her time with him. It was uplifting. It was life expanding. All kinds of things that she would tell over the course of the period of time she was with him, and even after that, that were generally positive about Manson and nothing bad. So there goes a period of time where that becomes quiet, and then she emerges on the other side of it and says, I've got a story to tell. I was abused. And this collates and boils down to a Manson was an abuser, that he groomed me and then abused me during the course of our relationship and threatened me after that. There's big problems with that. Whether it happened or not, there's big problems with her story, and it's just the way life works. First, she made contradictory statements for years. She wasn't a 5-year-old child when she said this. I mean, I know she was young when she got into this relationship with Manson, but at some point, your words have to mean something, and your credibility is on the line when you're an adult. When you tell contradicting stories, you're going to have to explain that, and she did do that, right? She absolutely did do that. So why did she lie about those things? We don't know the answer to that if she's telling the truth now. Of course, the Manson side, who's absolutely sure that Manson is incapable of this, they have the basket of it's just his art, bro, to put all of his lies in and carry those off the field. Wood's supporters have a basket as well called it's sexual assault, and you aren't ready to deal with it. You aren't ready to heal. You aren't ready to realize the extent of the abuse, or maybe even that it happened, until years after you're out of it. So you weren't really even lying, because your subjective perception at that time was that things weren't that bad. And then after the healing begins, you understand how bad it was. And so those things don't represent a lie. And you put all the contradictory statements into this basket and you carry them off of the field. Yeah, maybe. I don't know about that. I look in practical terms when I see people file lawsuits, and all of the suits in this case involve people that the actions happened a long time ago. And so you have a statute of limitations issue. I made a video about it. Everybody's talked about statute of limitations. And the way you try to get around it is this discovery rule. You didn't realize you were abused until within a reasonable time frame from when you filed your lawsuit, so that the statute of limitations is told. It doesn't bar you from filing your suit. Now, Wood didn't do that, but some of the other accusers did. And to me, that's a practical reason to say I didn't remember until now, is because that allows you to file your lawsuit. So I call that into question, that all these people had this similar experience of not realizing they were abused until basically all at the same time, and then filed this lawsuit. I'm not putting that down as support for Manson's theory that it was all concocted, but I do put it down as extremely convenient for the purpose of filing this lawsuit. I do not swallow that one right now. So Wood has also apparently been involved in her custody case with misleading her child's father, as well as the court, it appears, on this FBI letter and maybe some other allegations that were made in her custody dispute. So she has a credibility problem, and I don't think it's reasonable to sweep it all away and say, well, you don't have to look at this because here's the reason for it. Both sides are going to have to explore the weaknesses of the case, and more than that, because there is a middle position in this, unfortunately, which is that these people were in a volatile Hollywood rock music environment voluntarily. Every one of them entered the positions they were in voluntarily. Now, I know they say Manson exercised control once he had them in his orbit, and maybe that's true, but they got there because that's where they wanted to be originally. They're all on drugs. They're all high as a kite often. They're extremely tired. It's an unhealthy lifestyle. Manson's a pretty crazy living person anyway, and you're in that. And there is a notion I know that a lot of people have that, hey, look, what is happening here to some degree is weaponizing regret. And maybe so, because Wood has said things like that she was essentially raped on the set of the Heart-Shaped Glasses video, because she had said she enjoyed being on it, had said that nothing wrong happened on it, and then that story changed, and she went from saying, Nothing happened to actually. We did have sex, and it was a commercial sex act, she now says, and that she was essentially raped. And those words bother me from a truth standpoint. Essentially raped. You raped, you're not raped. Essentially raped kind of maybe means maybe at the time you weren't objecting and now you are. And how does the law deal with a situation like that? Because then you have to put up this scenario that, well, I couldn't meaningfully object because I was under the control of this other individual. And I know that's a whole notion, but it's a troublesome notion because it gives, once you invoke it, you have a free pass for every behavior you ever did and the ability to assign blame to the other party. Is that really where we should be with adults? I don't know about that. So she also said that when Trump was elected, that she would have to look at the rapist in the form of her president all the time. So the essentially raped and the thing about calling Trump her rapist shows to me a very generous reading of the word rapist. And then that gets applied to Manson. And I really wonder whether at the time some of these things were going on, she was okay with it going on. And then later on, when she believes that she was improperly under the influence and control of Manson, now she kind of retroactively says there was no consent or no consent possible. Therefore, these actions were abusive toward me. That in retrospect, even if I wasn't speaking out against it, even to him, I should have been and would have been if I hadn't been groomed. And I also don't like that word, pedophilic grooming. She wasn't a 13-year-old kid when Manson started to see her. Now, was it inappropriate? It depends on who you ask, the age gap. It was a lot. And she was young, and I guess too young to drink and all that. But still, I think she was 18 years old. So, I mean, I know what I was doing when I was 18. Hell, I was in the Army. So how much deference do you need to be given that you're essentially an infant or a child at that age? I don't think a lot, personally. I'm sorry, I don't buy the grooming scenario. That's separate than control if he was able to exercise it. I get what she's saying. My point is, you cannot, if you support her and you want to convince other people, ignore the fact that she has, according to your account, lied about her past history with Manson. Now, I know you excuse it, but you're going to have to deal with it, and Manson's side's going to have to deal with it. So this case is kind of interesting to me in that both sides have liars on each side. And it's going to come out that they both have lied, I think, in material ways. And who's going to be able to figure out a cohesive story to patch back together their credibility to take control of the case? Right now, the narrative kind of runs on a procedural standpoint to who's filing what declarations and who's got the upper hand in motions and things. But in theory, eventually, this all gets to court where a jury will hear it. And I've heard people say, well, finally know the truth. You know, that's asking a lot. I mean, I made another video about that, about how truth-seeking is just one goal of the justice system. It is not the only goal, and it is sometimes not the top goal. So it's nice to think that that's what the result's going to be, and it might be, but it also might not be, even if they go to a jury verdict. You may never know what actually happened. And a jury is not required to decide what actually happened, only what was more likely than not to have occurred. So that's a pretty low bar, and the evidence rules support that level of finding. It's not that rigorous. So we'll see what the court system has to say about it. It's a tough issue. There's no doubt. People say, well, I wish it was the good old days and stuff. But really, women were abused with almost no consequence for a lengthy period of time in many sectors of society. Now, the pendulum swings back too far in some cases on this Me Too movement to false allegations are hurting people who weren't abusive. And that's also wrong. That is also wrong. And that has to be stopped. And the only way you can do it is to let the system work the way the system was always meant to work, which is due process. The fact that it needed to be repaired to bring more emphasis to victims and to the systems of society that allowed abuse, that's separate than changing the concept of due process. Because women and men all deserve justice, and nobody deserves to be abused. I don't think anybody watching this says sexual abuse should be allowed. I mean, we really shouldn't get into that. Nobody thinks that. And almost everybody would agree that people should be protected against false allegations of abuse. And that's what the system is supposed to do. I said almost because there are some people who don't believe such a thing essentially as false allegations. And the way you end up doing that is by having your day in court if that's what you choose. And we've let some more people off the bus on that one because there are some people who think, since they already know which side is right, that any court action on this, criminal or civil, is just wrong and abuse of the system. And I think because none of us do know the answers to that with the level of certainty we wish we did, that's why you do have to allow this system to work. And you can't just call the operation of the system abuse, even though one side or the other is being wrongly put through it in this case. So that's my notion, is that I think there's two sides out there that have staked out pretty extreme positions. They haven't done it as nastily toward each other, in my opinion, as people have on the Depp Heard case, but still, they're kind of extreme positions from what I see beyond what the evidence can support, that we all maybe would be better served to be a little bit more humble with what we do know. If nothing else, that can make your argument stronger if you acknowledge, well, yeah, he did this and that's nasty. He shouldn't have done that. But this, that, and the other. And she did lie about this, okay? She's not completely credible. And that's part of what makes it harder for her to bring her case, but she still did it. Make your arguments, including the weaknesses in it, to other people so they can see that you've evaluated the whole context of what's going on. Short of the court doing other things, I guess that's about all we have to talk about on this case at this point. Legal Bites did put out a great video talking about repressed memories. I thought that was interesting because I haven't given it much credence in this case because I kind of see it as a maneuver around the statute of limitations, and therefore, to me, it costs credibility for the accusers. But there were some good counterpoints put out in that video. Encourage people to watch it. Stuff like that can help you think about the case in new ways while you're waiting for something else to actually happen in court. Anyway, have a good weekend. Bye.